Let's go back in time to 1932 as Converse brings you historic footage of the legendary original Celtics, with whom all great professional teams are compared.
We have now taken over your radio.
Richie Guerin is about to show you the most important step in getting past a man. It's the first one.
And Oscar will inbound it. The men in green, the Milwaukee Bucks, that's Alcindor against Bellamy.
Has Jordan. Allen shakes. Gray gets two.
Gilmore on snap. Brother. Lead Toledo artists. You get 21.
4:28 to go in the first quarter for the Cow Palace. Here's Barry.
Jordan. Open. Chicago with the lead.
Welcome back to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast at HarvardProxysm.com. I am Jason Mann, and I'm with Rich Kraetsch, and our guest today is Adam Johnson of Basketball Pantheon. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good. So we are going to talk about Tony Parker. He is 82nd all-time in win shares, 106th in win shares per 48, 190th in box score plus minus, and 120th in value over replacement player. He has 4 championships, was a really key player in 3 of those teams, is the 2007 Finals MVP, 3 times on the All-NBA second team, 1 time on the third team, 1 season top 10 in win shares for 48, never in the top 10 for value over replacement player. You know, I kind of think of his case. It's not necessarily the strongest case, but I kind of think, you know, if you're going to make a case for him, it's someone like Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, or James Worthy, where he is like the number 2 or number 3 player to a clear number 1 of dynasty. So, Adam, you chose to talk about Tony Parker. What do you think about his case for a potential top 50?
Yeah, as far as actually making the top 50, it'll be pretty difficult. But I completely agree with that, kind of the second banana or third banana on a great team. Because the consistency is a huge thing. I mean, really his peak in my mind is kind of the 06 season to the 04 to the 14 season, and that's a huge run of great seasons. There's 8 years there. 2009 was probably the strongest statistical season, but I completely agree with that. It's more of a piece of a dynasty rather than something big of like a kind of a smaller team, if that makes sense. Yeah, and he had a great career, and it's going to go down as, I think, vastly underrated. But in terms of actually making the top 50, I mean, he never carried a team or was, the undisputed number 1 guy. So, yeah, it will be tough for him to make, that case, I guess.
And one of the problems with him, and that's at least for me, when we talk about Tony Parker on this level of, top 50, is that there's such a good crop. And that's unfortunately his era that he played in. There was so many other great point guards that when we look at this list and the guys we're going to add, I mean, there are guys that I would put ahead of Tony Parker that we're going to have to make real choices of having these guys in our list, which makes it a lot harder for Tony Parker. I mean, there's a ton of guys that we're throughout this process. I mean, we have, we just recently did a podcast about Steve Nash talking about him. And that's like a guy that we have to kind of think about and consider. But if you have to think about and consider Steve Nash, it's hard to make a case for Tony Parker. It really, really is tough because he's just not at that level. And there's so many other point guards of his era too. Chris Paul is another one that we look at, and guys that are just like these all-time legendary point guards. And I don't know if Parker's there, even if he's a very good player and if he's something that's very important to the history of the NBA. Is he an all-time great point guard? It's hard to make that case.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is some evidence that he could have been more productive in kind of a bigger role. I mean, I think just being in the system he was in, it's sort of like, some of the other like team-based teams that share the ball a lot. And I guess another thing about the Spurs is because of the limiting of minutes. I mean, he spent a lot of his career playing, 32 or fewer minutes per game, later in his career, even fewer than 30 minutes per game, which is probably good on him for, in a sense, on, and preserving his body and allowing him to, maybe be more efficient or be more productive per minute, but it's going to depress his raw stat totals, which might hurt if he were playing a little bit more minutes per season. That might have helped his case a little bit. I mean, probably not enough to really put him on there, but I think it's at least worth considering.
Right. I agree, and I think the you're right. The counting stats are never going to look that impressive, and I think his advanced stuff, he has over 100 win shares for his career, but never more than 10 in a season, which is kind of incredible. As career PER is just right about 19, so it's really consistency, which is an awesome value. It's a huge value to a franchise, but in terms of ranking individual players, that's not probably the first thing you look at.
Yeah, and actually, I'll go through that right now because we're doing that for all these guys, kind of looking at their, era-dependent and position-dependent, advanced stats. Here, I'll start off first with era and position, so this is guards of his era. He's 22nd in points per 36, which is solid. 39th in assists per 36. Second in field goal percentage. Unfortunately, 179th in three-point percentage, but you kind of know that if you know Tony Parker. Then 34th in effective field goal percentage, and then 13th in value over replacement. So that's era and position. Very good, and this, of course, includes guards of all kind, not simply just point guards, but you kind of get a good pocket there of where he's at, and it's very consistent and it's solid. But yeah, it might be out of the top 50. Looking at how he rates among position all time, so this is guards of all time, 33rd in value replacement, which I think is very impressive for a guy like that you mentioned, Adam, that never really had one of those big years where he grabbed 15 15 value. I mean, but still very good and very consistent throughout that. 61st rather in effective field goal percentage, 262nd in 3-point percentage, but we won't knock that against him. That's all right. 19th in field goal percentage, which I think is very impressive. This is where it gets a little weird, is 118th in assists per 36. That's all time amongst guards. And then 57th all time amongst guards in points per 36. So actually grades out as a better kind of, and then that's if, the Tony Parker thing, that the points has a little bit more of a pocket than the assists, or at least a better case. But yeah, when you look at those two combined, he's just kind of not quite there for me. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I do wonder if there's any chance, and it's probably unlikely because he's pretty small. Small point guards don't tend to age that well, and he's already kind of, the last couple of seasons, there have been some noticeable decline, especially last season. But if for some reason he's able to turn it around and be like a really effective, good player, up until age like 36, 37, is able to kind of continue, him and Aldridge and Leonard are able to kind of continue this, Spurs juggernaut that's been basically awesome since 1990. Then maybe there's a different conversation to be had. If we're redoing this again in 10 years, my guess that's unlikely, but that's kind of the only way that I see a path for him to eventually be on that list.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think so. Basically, you're kind of saying if he does something like the 2011 Jason Kidd role, where he's like the third or fourth guy on like another title team, that might completely add to the legacy, and it would, I think. And I guess if you're looking at like a Hall of Fame case, like he'll make that because of a lot of the international stuff as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think you're right. To actually make this list, he might have to have like one of those kind of second generation things. But the difference between him and Kidd is, I mean, the size for Kidd was such an advantage, and he was so good defensively, and then developed that 3-point shot. And I just don't think Parker's going to ever really do that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair bet. Although I don't know if I would have bet on Jason Kidd developing it either. So
that's true.
So it's certainly possible. So Adam, anything else to say about Tony?
Yeah, I had a couple things. I mean, I grew up in San Antonio, and my dad's company had season tickets, so I was fortunate to see him play just tons of times growing up. And I have like worked and trained some point guards at like the high school level. And I use a lot of his stuff, like kind of just little things around the rim. He was amazingly efficient just in his movement, like around the perimeter and getting into the paint. I mean, he's a fast player, but I wouldn't necessarily call him too quick. But he just knew angles and when to finish, when to use a backboard, when to use kind of left hand on the right side, kind of use opposite, stuff like that, and had an amazing floater, which I use his kind of template with a lot of the guys I work with. to use. And so things like that, like imprint on the game, maybe initially people don't think there would be such a huge one, but I think, yeah, for people who watch, point guards closely, there's a lot of things, especially guys who need to score as point guards. There's a lot of things you can take from his game that will really, really benefit people. And that is, at least means something to me. And he's had some pretty great moments. I think that people might, forget, a couple of game winners. There was one, they were playing Philly at a game I was at, hit a buzzer beater. And then obviously the big one was game 1 of the 2013 finals, that kind of crazy shot that bounced around the rim to beat Miami in that game 1. So, I mean, he's had some of those moments too. Like, he's undoubtedly had a great career, and one that I think, will be kind of underlooked for some reason, maybe just because of being kind of the second or third guy on a great team. But yeah, I mean, he's going to end up having a very cool career once it's all said and done.
Absolutely. So why don't you let everyone know about Basketball Pantheon?
Okay, yeah. So my friend Braden Neubauer and I started it, kind of a childhood friend, and we've just been obsessed with basketball, all of our lives. And I coach now and do some stuff like that. We've always, really been into the history, particularly me on that side. And we just wanted to do something with that kind of what's like the niche you could find. So yeah, we have a site where we rank. I mean, a big part of it is the list that we have, and we rank like really random stuff, like sometimes just commercials, which is a list we just recently finished. We have the 40 best, commercials involving NBA players of all time, which was, really fun. And then we have other ones where it's like the greatest players, we're going to eventually have greatest playoff series, greatest games, and things like that. And so for our players list, we have the list done already. We have 150, but we're releasing them completely random because we didn't want it to be like, oh, who's number one? It's not a countdown necessarily, but we're releasing the write-ups kind of randomly, so people more just learn about that player rather than like worry about where he's ranked, if that makes sense. So yeah, so that's what we're doing. We have 7 players up as of now. We're working on a few more. We'll have those up in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, in the off season, we're taking a very kind of a little lighter than usual with it being August and nothing going on. But for stuff like this, the kind of historical stuff, this is a good time. So we're still working on some stuff, and yeah, check out those lists. And we're on Twitter, B-Ball Pantheon. Yeah, the Instagram account, kind things like that. So that we, my brother posts, old pictures of, Elvin Hayes and guys like that. So, yeah, so that's kind of the idea.
Adam, I think we might have lost you.
Site that we're working.
There he is. Well, sort of.
We're, kind of good enough at it. So yeah, it's really fun. It's kind of in the early stages, but yeah, any guys who listen to this podcast would probably like it. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's a really cool site. I really like it. It's a nice. I think it's a neat approach. It's like a different perspective on looking at basketball history, which we appreciate because we like anyone who talks about basketball history in an interesting way, and you guys are doing great stuff. So really great to have you on, and we're going to have you on again for another player later on in the process. So we're excited to talk about him as well. We'll let it be a surprise for the listeners. We'll let them
okay.
Let them see. So everyone can check us out at hardwoodperoxism.com. We are part of the HP Basketball Network. You can find the whole network on iTunes. We'd appreciate a rating and review. You can also find us at overandbacknba.com. It's our new forums where you can discuss what you think about Tony Parker or any of the other players that we're talking about as part of this Top 50 project. We've got a lot of interesting posts kind of building a neat community of people who like to talk about basketball. So appreciate anyone who wants to check that out. It is incredibly easy to sign up, and we are nice people. That's about it. Rich, you got anything else?
I don't know about nice. No, I'm just joking. We're nice people, but I don't know about that.
I'm a nice person, Rich.
Yeah, no, I'm very nice. I was gonna say you're the jerk, but never mind. I got jeez.
Yeah. Now we're gonna fight.
How awkward. But no, yeah, absolutely. Overandbacknba.com if you guys want to check that out. Yeah, that's about it, and we'll continue our process. And yeah, our special secret show with Adam. Who are we talking about? I don't know.
All right, we'll find out. All right, we'll talk to you guys later.